Dr. Dan Edmunds is an existential psychoanalyst and psychotherapist in Northeastern Pennsylvania. His work has focused on drug-free, relational approaches for those undergoing extreme states of mind, as well as autism and developmental differences. Dr. Edmunds is the founder of the Center for Humane Psychiatry, an emancipatory movement for human rights in the mental health system. He is also the author of Being Autistic, an approach towards understanding and acceptance. You won't want to miss this important conversation. Thanks for tuning in.
I wanna try and take in all the highs, embrace them for more than a moment's time. I want you, please don't move when I push you away. I know I contradict myself some days, but will you ride the lows with me?
Welcome to Mental Health News Radio. I am your host, Kristin Sunanta Walker. Our goal is to help discussions about mental health be a regular part of your daily life, no different than discussions about physical health. Mental illness can be a topic of discussion under the umbrella of mental health, along with so many other topics. This show is the original program on mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com. Our network of shows are played in over 180 countries and cover more topics under that umbrella than you can possibly imagine. We were talking about mental health long before it became cool and popular to talk about, and thank goodness it has become so popular. We have incredible guests, advocates, patients, experts, people. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy our intro music, a song named Lows, written by Aubrey Toon. You can find her music at www.aubreytoone.com.
That night when I started praying, I cried. Will you ride the lows with me? Will you ride the lows with me? When I'm down, my vision gets blurry.
Dr. Dan Edmunds, thank you so much for coming back on Mental Health News Radio.
Yes, thank you.
So it's been a while since you've been on. The last time we had a discussion about autism and about your work with kids, especially, and you being able to connect with them in a way that maybe someone that hasn't been diagnosed with autism can.
Right.
What were you going to share with us today?
Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about my work with extreme states of mind, and then just also kind of addressing a few issues as far as mental health reform.
Okay, absolutely. Now, when you say extreme states of mind, can you clarify that for us, other than what it obviously sounds like, but I'm sure there's a more detailed description.
What I'm referring to is what would commonly be the label of schizophrenia, schizoaffective, bipolar, voice hearing type of experiences that individuals might have. That's kind of what I'm referring to when I say extreme states of mind.
Have you seen, or what have you seen that is a result of this year, 2020, and everything that's gone on in it, in terms of that population?
Well, what I will say as a whole, that we have dynamics that there's two main things that kind of fuel mental distress, and that would be isolation and financial distress. So people are being hit very hard with that just in general. But those that are struggling with more of these extreme states of mind, I have been noticing, unfortunately, they are having a more difficult time finding the support that they need, and I guess are more prone to potential crisis. So there's been a lot of need to make sure that we're trying to find outlets and connections for these individuals that can be supportive in a very challenging time.
Yeah, I found with, I'll say one of our other podcasters has an adult son who is on the autism spectrum, and they had a very difficult time with getting him to wear a mask, that they couldn't do, that there was the social isolation piece, and that led to a lot of extreme anxiety and other behaviors that they hadn't seen, in quite a few years.
Right. And one of the things I would distinguish too is that the term's been thrown out there as far as social distancing, but I would rather call it physical distancing, that we're having to distance each other physically, but we still can strive to maintain some type of connection with one another and bond with one another. And I think that's kind of a crucial thing, particularly with all of what we're contending with.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I've been on Zoom more during this than I have been in my entire life. So,
Right.
well, how about with your patients, the individuals that you're working with, that extreme state of mind? Where do you start with someone that already, if they're lucky and they have wonderful treatment, you're on a pretty regimented schedule of things getting done, have to do this particular thing every day, make sure meds are taken and so on. And then this whole year has been a huge disruption into all of those things, including just even being able to get help, because I know all of the people that are doing any form of counseling are overloaded with patients because of all the stress of what's going on.
Yes, there are a lot of people needing help. The other unfortunate thing is that as far as face-to-face visits is pretty much limited. I I personally, I'm still seeing some individuals face to face, but for the most part, it's all being done telehealth, and for some people that's difficult in itself. That
Right.
they can't really deal with that. Now, what I did want to kind of launch into, I wanted to kind of share a couple examples of the work I've done with these individuals, and some of the approaches that I personally feel are kind of misguided. So I think sometimes when people are having certain experiences that in our society and even in the profession that I'm in, they're the first thought is, let's shut this down, let's suppress this. This is unusual. We don't want to have this type of experience or behavior happening. But I think sometimes that is the wrong way to go, is just to try to suppress it. I think that we have to learn how to manage it and work with it. Um, so so I'll give an example. Some time ago, there was a fellow, and he had a diagnosis of schizophrenia. And quite frequently, he would repeat, almost kind of like a mantra in a way, this phrase that most people just kind of thought was unintelligible gibberish, that it meant nothing. So he would say that the bat flew right past him, the shock was tremendous, and he had to go to the Social Security office.
Okay.
So So I would imagine if somebody said that to you, that you would kind of, well, what exactly does that signify, or does it really signify anything? But as I got to connect with him and learn more about him as a fellow human being, I realized that he had been in the Vietnam War, and he told me a story of being in a cave and being trapped there, and there were bats, and it was a very frightening experience. So that's why he said the shock was tremendous. But the other part of that is when he returned to the United States, they gave him ECT treatment, which he disliked, and it caused some issues with his memory, um, and that's why he said he had to go to the Social Security office, because he felt that he wasn't functional after that point in time. So as you pieced it all together and you understood the context, and that's one of the things those who have had these labels what they are saying many times is steeped in deep metaphor. But I always found that they were telling me the truth. But I had to be able to make that connection to decode what they were actually trying to convey. And a good deal of the time, there is a connection with deep-rooted trauma. So I recall individuals, there's one young man that he had the voice hearing experience. And I began to, rather than suppress, as I got to know him, I asked for permission. Can I know the names of these voices? Because he had names for them. And can you tell me, are they male? Are they female? What do they say? What do they do? And I was given permission to interact with them. So if they were persecutory voices telling him bad things about himself, I could interact and say, okay, well, why don't you leave him alone? That sort of thing. And it seemed to work for him. And then he eventually transferring that skill to him, so he would be able to manage that experience rather than just trying to shut it all down. But the other important thing was that he came to the realization, which I had kind of figured out early on, but took him a little while to discover this, that actually these voices represented himself at different points in time. So for instance, he heard one voice of a 4-year-old boy that was frightened all the time. And he was physically abused, and that began when he was 4 years old. So you could see where the connections were and how that kind of worked. I had a lady one time that came to see me, and she declared to me that she was Mary Magdalene and her boyfriend was Jesus. Now, I would imagine if she went to certain facilities and were to say that, they would certainly tell her that no, she wasn't Mary Magdalene, no, he wasn't Jesus. Probably wouldn't spend a lot of time delving into that. Probably just a prescription would be written, okay, you need an antipsychotic or whatever, and she would be on her way. But she had been through that experience many times, and that's what she had complained about, is that oftentimes she had gone through the system and sometimes felt kind of invalidated or even dehumanized at the worst points. So I didn't take that approach to shut that down either and say, no, that doesn't make any sense. You're not that person. And what I did was tell me what it's like being Mary Magdalene. Tell me about this Jesus person. What's he about? And we went that way for a time, and I began to learn why she connected with these stories. And she began to tell me about her own experiences, and I could see why she kind of absorbed that story. But of course, she took it to the extreme and felt that she actually was that person. But over time, she came to a discovery that no, she wasn't actually that person. No, he wasn't actually Jesus, but this was symbolic to her, based on the experiences that she had in her life, and also what she was looking for. That she was looking for someone to save her from all of these difficult, awful things that she had gone through. So as you put it all together, it began to make sense. And once she came to that realization, that's when the recovery process happened. And she got married, she had children, she obtained a job. And that's the sad thing too, is that sometimes I see this also with autism, that early on there are very grim prophecies made. So if you have this particular label, whatever it may be, that, oh, you're doomed, you're not going to be able to function, you're not going to be able to do this, you're not going to be able to do that, you're going to be on medications for the rest of your life.
Right.
And the fact of the matter is that it does not work that way, that I have seen many people overcome many things. But of course, it required them, they needed a great level of support. So I think that when I talk about mental health reform, I think that's one of the things that we need to look at, is that rather than just seeing things in this idea that, oh, that person, they have some kind of chemical imbalance, all of that, let's look at the other imbalances that are out there. So there are imbalances of power. There is imbalances as far as financial matters. And so we have to consider those things. And I think sometimes we're prone to just look at behavior, how a person is behaving, and put a label on that, rather than looking deeply into the experience. Because I think behavior, even behavior that we don't always like very much, is a form of communication. It's telling us something that about this person's distress and what they have been through. So we need to really look at, okay, what has gone in um, and that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to, if a person has gone through trauma, that we have to rehash every detail of what has happened. So I look at it, if you're trapped in this dark place and the door's open, you can ask yourself, okay, why am I here? Why is it dark? And ask all of these questions. Or you can say, okay, I don't want to be here. I'm going to try to make my way to the door and get out. So that's always a focus that I have with the folks that I am interacting with, is that if they choose to share about past traumatic experiences, that's fine and good. But I don't think that needs to be the main focus. What we need to look at is, where are you at now? And to look at the inner strength that you have that's gotten you to this point, the resiliency that you have, and where are you going from here? Where do you want to be?
I think that's a hard part for people. I know it's hard for people that aren't struggling with mental health issues, where you read about what resilience is. Okay, so the definition of resilience, is it this person that, even though there's a raging pandemic, they managed to build a fort, put a new garage up, still run every day, write a book they've never written, blah 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 blah, or or is it just that you did okay with whatever it is that you're dealing with, be it schizophrenia, be it bipolar disorder, whatever it is, that you are continuing to be here, and you're continuing to manage yourself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. And yeah, and I think we have to also meet people where they are at,
right,
in many situations. And sometimes that people, professionals, others, might have certain expectations in their mind of where they would like to see the person be and what they'd like to see them do. But that doesn't necessarily line up with what the person themselves is looking for.
right.
Or
How they were raised, what kinds of things society they've picked out that they put on themselves. Yeah, all of those things come into play. I mean, I can see where if someone comes in and they seem like they've been doing well, their hands are clean. I'm just using that as one example of 1,000 different things that something could be. But let's say their hands are clean, they look healthy, like they're eating well, their eyes are bright, and then you start seeing a decline, and then they come in and their hands are not clean, and you can tell that they've not been taking care of themselves. So I think people get distorted in that thinking of putting so much onto somebody where they're supposed to be at, instead of, well, what's going on that we've seen this decline in this person's physical care, as an example.
Right. And I think about when we go back to like the era where lobotomy was performed and that sort of thing. And when you look at it, that the sad thing during that time frame was that people actually, for a time, believed that to be helpful solely, not because it really aided the person in any way. It basically made them subdued, and they were not able
Yes.
to bother anyone. So that's how it got interpreted. That if a person is not disturbing anyone else, then that gets interpreted as progress. But was that really progress? No.
Yeah, like women being diagnosed with hysteria. No, maybe it's the way society treated women and sex in those days. So yeah, exactly.
Right. So, but I think even in this day and age, we still are kind of prone to that thinking that if we just shut things down for a person, and I remember hearing this statement between the difference between neurosis and psychosis is that with neurosis, one might bother a couple people, whereas with psychosis, they're bothering a lot of people. And so that becomes the issue is that are we just trying to stifle the person and make them amenable to the rest of what is going on? And sometimes we have to look at that too. Are we just trying to get people to adapt to oppressive situations, to situations that actually they shouldn't be having to accept? So I always have thought about that too in my role as a professional, that not only is my work, and I think this is a key point, that the word therapist, when you really boil it down, is one who is a servant, an attendant.
Right.
So combined with that, I think taking on a role as an activist is also important. That if I'm truly going to support the people that I'm interacting with, I have to also be doing my part to deal with whatever injustices may be impacting that person's mental health.
Right.
And so sometimes we don't focus enough energy on that as far as the social aspects.
Very true. Oh boy. Yeah, very true. I wanted to ask you this, and this comes from me not being a clinician. I know you've seen people who have been diagnosed with all kinds of things where you sit there and you have to wind through a labyrinth of diagnoses, and a lot of them are not correct. Is there anyone that gets inappropriately or misdiagnosed with dissociative disorder instead of schizophrenia?
I have not personally seen that, but I could see how that could happen, and I
Right.
think there is a misunderstanding between those two things.
Yeah, that's what
Uh,
I was thinking.
that a lot of people have this idea that schizophrenia is dissociative disorder, and that they're not. Those are very different circumstances. So now, when I think of bipolar disorder, a lot of times what I would kind of describe with that is you have a situation where a person is doing everything possible to stave off depression.
Yeah.
So the manic side of things is it's all of this energy to stave off that depression, but unfortunately, then the depression kind of wins out. And so you have that shifting back and forth. And there's research on this too, that there's often you find a trauma base to that as well. And now I'll mention too, going back to kind of the social issues, that also when you think about addiction, so I remember some time ago that when they began talking about some issues and the opiate crisis was just becoming something that was being heard about, that I kind of have this assumption that the problem would be like in major cities, larger states. But what you find is particularly with the opiate crisis, that it has hit areas, rural areas, places that are poor, economically depressed areas. So what you see is that the social conditions are poor, and sometimes people seek out this temporary relief. They're trying to fill a void in their lives. They feel hopeless, and so it's kind of a failed attempt to fill that void, obviously. But you, as you kind of break it down, you can understand how this problem, where it results from, and how it's fueled. So I think that's something interesting to look at as well.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, the part with bipolar disorder where you are essentially trying to stave off or outrun the inevitable depression.
Right.
And I think of that in terms of like seasonal affective disorder, where I know for me, I suffered from that for years. And I had to learn how to regulate myself so that I didn't shoot myself out of a cannon during the spring and the summer to the point where I was just physically, emotionally, mentally exhausted come, late fall through winter. I had nothing left to give, and I was in a much more sort of weakened state to where depression could, take over and sort of force me to rest. So I just don't get as manic on purpose. I just, and I live a very different life than I did before too, but I just don't I don't go to the mania, to the highest high and high and high during those other times of the year. And that has helped me tremendously not have to go deep into that depression in the winter months.
Right.
But that's learning. Age plays a huge role. So the reason why I brought that up is, how often do you see someone coming in with these intense states, but as they get older, have more life experience, learn more lessons, live through many, cycles of things to see, oh, there is an end point, and I always, climb out of it. So I have a history of success, so to speak. How often do you see that sort of calming down of symptoms as someone ages?
That does happen. That does happen from time to time, yes. Now, the one thing I'll mention too is that it's interesting to look at that some of the various behaviors that have various labels associated with them, in some instances, we can find that there are people engaging in these behaviors at other times. So I think about it, well, with the virus, you don't have this going on right now, but before, at a football game, you have people that they paint themselves and they're yelling and they're screaming and all of that, and that's manic behavior. But in that context, that's considered acceptable. I remember one time I was giving a talk, kind of looking at kids that were having attentional problems in schools and so forth, and alternative things that we could do for them rather than automatically, well, just stick them on a medication. So some of those that were attending were describing some of these behaviors that they didn't really like and so forth. So I began to go around the room, and I saw, I guess, one guy, he was a teacher, and he's chewing on his pencil. So I grabbed the pencil out of his head. I said, no, stop chewing on the pencil. You can't be doing that. I see another guy, he's kind of looking out the window. No, you're daydreaming. Can't be doing that. And one was tapping his foot. But as you looked at it, were all of those people in the room ADHD? No.
Right.
But did they have little traits that could have looked like that? Yes. And I think that's one thing that I would say with the current diagnostic manual, that back in the 50s, there's only 50 disorders listed. Now we have about 500 or so.
Yeah.
And
Throw a rock,
so
hit a diagnosis. Exactly.
sometimes we are too quick to pathologize human experience. And I think that when people are going through certain difficult states or these extreme states of mind, it's not to say that this is a good thing or that they are not struggling, but is it an understandable based on the conditions that these individuals have endured? It's understandable that they would behave in the ways that they do, that it would be a reaction. So I give the example too, that if you went to your physician, and let's say you're sitting there and the nurse takes your blood pressure, measures your heart rate and all of that, and you're fine, and then all of a sudden someone comes in and startles you, and then they measure your heart rate again, and they say, oh, no, you have heart disease. We would say, no, that's kind of a unusual thing to say. We would dismiss that. But that's kind of what happens sometimes in the mental health system, that a person reacts in a way to a certain event and then automatically, no, you have this terrible disorder as a result. So I think that's something we have to look at.
Yeah, agreed. And I mean, right now, because of this whole year, I mean, I'm glad for the people that have never thought about counseling, that have said, oh yeah, I'm going to counseling, and, taking it seriously because of the stress of this year. I'm sad for everyone that, and including myself in there, that has seen themselves regress a little bit into some things that they thought they had, gotten past. And, and the people I get the most afraid for are the ones that still, that are acting out from all this stress, and they still absolutely will not consider just even getting some straight up, counseling.
Right.
For that, because this year has challenged everybody, and it would be really easy to just label, diagnose everybody with all kinds of things. But mostly what I'm hearing is PTSD, trauma, anxiety, that kind of stuff going on a lot.
Yes, most definitely. I think I've definitely seen an increase in people struggling with depressive behavior.
Yeah.
And a lot of folks that maybe never really struggled with depression before, but now they are, because of the things that they're kind of having to contend with, and the pressures that are upon their families, particularly financially, or with kids not being in school, and, well, I guess technically in school, but being schooled at home, creates a lot of burdens for families right now too.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Dan, can you tell our listeners where they can find out more about you?
I have a website at selfgrowth.com that has a whole compilation of articles, various writings, and other works that I've compiled over the years in regards to autism, extreme states of mind, and just mental health in general. So just a simple search of my name and selfgrowth.com will come up, and it can find me that way.
Right. Excellent articles. I read the one on Psychology Today, Extreme States and the Human Condition, which, I mean, if that article doesn't apply to this year, I don't know what would. So thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Yes, thank you.
And listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Mental Health News Radio.
Hi, listeners. I'll make it quick. These are some really cool places that give discounts and other cool things for listeners of Mental Health News Radio Network. If you want to get amazing help with healing from narcissistic abuse, go to healfromanarcissist.com. If you want CBD products that are the best of the best, I use them myself, go to proze.com and use the code mentalhealth20, mentalhealth20. If you want to get daily perk ups that help retrain your brain to think more positively, go to perkupdaily.com. And also, just because this one's fun, snarkycandles.com. I guarantee you'll love them. Snarky with a Y, SNARKY, candles.com. And don't forget, if you want to hear all the shows on the network about first responders, you can go to firstrespondernmentalhealthnetwork.com, and all of our shows that focus on narcissistic abuse, narcissisticabusehealingnetwork.com. Thanks for listening, and back to the show.
But will you ride the low, low, lows with me? Will you ride the low, low, lows with me?
One thing you can always count on at Mental Health News Radio Network and my show is that there will always be dogs around. Why? They are natural healers, excellent for your mental health. The original therapy dog Miles has something to say in just a moment. For now, please check out all of our amazing shows at mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com and all your favorite podcast apps. Until next time, I'm Kristin Sananta Walker, and thank you for listening.
Me tonight, and I can ride the low, low, lows with me. I can ride the low, low, lows with me till my vision clears up perfectly. I can ride the low, low, lows with me.
Good boy.